Before we begin, I need you to understand something. The Appalachian Trail stretches over 2,190 miles through some of the most remote wilderness in America. Millions of people hike portions of it every year. Most have peaceful experiences, beautiful views, a connection with nature, a sense of accomplishment. But some people experience something entirely else. What you're about to hear are 5 stories from the Appalachian Trail. Stories that were never fully explained. Stories that ended in disappearances, death, or worse, survival with no memory of what happened. These accounts come from hikers, rangers, and rescue teams. Some details have been changed to protect identities, but the core of each story remains intact. If you're planning to hike the Appalachian Trail, maybe finish listening to this first. And if you're listening alone in the dark, well, you might want to turn on a light. Now, let's begin.
The hiker who walked in circles.
In September 2019, an experienced hiker named Marcus Chen started a section hike from Springer Mountain, Georgia, heading north. Marcus was 34, a software engineer from Atlanta, and this wasn't his first time on the trail. He'd completed several sections over the years and knew what he was doing. He had proper gear, plenty of experience, and he'd filed his itinerary with the ranger station. He was supposed to reach Neal's Gap in 3 days. It's about 30 miles, an easy trek for someone of Marcus's experience level. He'd done longer sections in worse conditions. His girlfriend Sarah expected to pick him up on Thursday afternoon. Thursday came and went. No Marcus. Sarah called the ranger station Friday morning. They initiated a search. What they found doesn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense. A search and rescue team located Marcus on Saturday afternoon, less than 2 miles from where he'd started. 2 miles. In 3 days, he'd somehow only covered 2 miles. But here's what makes it worse. His GPS tracker showed he had walked over 40 miles. 40 miles in a 2-mile radius. When they found him, Marcus was sitting on a log, staring at his map. He was severely dehydrated, covered in scratches and bruises, and his hiking boots were worn through, literally worn through, the soles. The kind of wear you'd expect after hundreds of miles. Not a 3-day hike. The rescue team said he looked confused, disoriented. When they asked him what happened, he just kept saying, "I couldn't find the trail. I kept looking for the trail, but it wasn't there." The thing is, the Appalachian Trail is well marked. White blazes on trees every few hundred feet. You'd have to actively try to lose it. And Marcus was an experienced hiker. He knew how to navigate. He had a compass, a GPS unit, and a map. But according to his GPS log, he'd been walking in elaborate, looping patterns. Sometimes circles, sometimes figure eights. The paths crossed over themselves dozens of times. And the strangest part, the elevation data showed he'd been going up and down the same mountain repeatedly. The same mountain, over and over. Sarah drove up immediately when she heard they'd found him. She said when she saw Marcus, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. His eyes were sunken, his face was gaunt, and he wouldn't stop shaking. On the drive home, he finally started talking. What he said disturbed Sarah enough that she made him promise never to hike alone again. Marcus said he'd started hiking Thursday morning, just after sunrise. Everything was normal for the first hour. Clear trail, good weather. He was making excellent time. Then, around 9 a.m., he noticed something odd. He'd been following the white blazes like he was supposed to, but he passed the same rock formation twice. A distinctive granite outcropping that looked like a frozen wave. He'd taken a photo of it the first time because it was interesting. When he saw it again, 30 minutes later, he checked his camera. Same rock. Same angle. He was certain he'd been walking forward the whole time, following the blazes, but somehow he'd looped back. Marcus said he tried correcting course. He checked his compass, verified his direction on the map, and started hiking north again. More carefully this time, paying close attention to landmarks. An hour later, he was back at the same rock. He told Sarah this went on for hours. Every time he thought he was making progress, he'd end up back at that rock, or at a different landmark he'd already passed. The white blazes were there, he was following them, but they weren't leading him forward. They were leading him in circles. By the first evening, Marcus said he was starting to panic. He tried hiking without following the trail, just picked a direction and walked. It didn't matter. He'd end up back at the same few locations: the granite wave, a dead oak tree with a hollow trunk, a small creek crossing. He said it was like the forest was only 3 miles wide, like he was in a loop, a bounded space, and he couldn't get out. He said he tried everything. Marked trees with his knife so he'd know if he was repeating paths, but he never saw his marks again. Tried following the creek to see where it led, but it seemed to flow in a circle, which is impossible. Even tried hiking at night with his headlamp, thinking maybe the daylight was somehow disorienting him. Nothing worked. By the second day, Marcus said he started seeing things. Not hallucinations from dehydration. He still had water then. But impossible things. He'd see hikers in the distance and call out to them, but when he'd get closer, there was no one there. Just trees. He'd hear voices calling his name, but they'd come from different directions at once. And then there were the blazes. Marcus said on the second night, he noticed the white blazes were different. They were still there, still marking the trail, but they weren't painted. They were carved. Deep gouges in the bark, roughly the same shape as the painted blazes, but clearly not official trail markers. And they were fresh. Sap still oozing from the cuts. He said he started following the carved blazes instead, thinking maybe they'd lead him out. They led him to a clearing he'd never seen before. A perfect circle of dead grass about 20 feet in diameter. In the center was a cairn, a stack of rocks, and on top of the cairn was his own GPS unit. Marcus still had his GPS unit on his belt. He checked. It was there. But there was also one on the cairn. He said he picked it up and turned it on. It showed his exact GPS location. But when he checked the log, it showed a path he hadn't walked. A straight line. North. From Springer Mountain to 40 miles away. The path he was supposed to have walked. The path that, according to one GPS unit, sitting on a cairn in a clearing that doesn't exist, he did walk. All 40 miles of it. Marcus said he dropped the GPS unit and ran. Just picked a direction and ran as fast as he could. He ran until he collapsed. When he woke up, it was dawn, and he was sitting on a log less than 2 miles from where he'd started 3 days earlier. The rescue team found him 2 hours later. Sarah took Marcus to a hospital. They found nothing physically wrong with him, except dehydration and exhaustion. No head injury, no signs of drugging. His drug screen was clean. Mentally, doctors said he was sound. Not psychotic, not delusional, just traumatized. The Ranger Service investigated. They hiked the area where Marcus claimed he'd been walking in circles. The trail was normal, well marked. No unusual features. They found no carved blazes, no clearing with dead grass, no cairn. They did find one thing, though. Something they didn't include in the official report, but one of the rangers told Sarah about it later. They found Marcus's boot prints. Dozens of them. Overlapping. In patterns that didn't make sense. Looping and spiraling around the same quarter-mile area. Like he'd been pacing. Or dancing. Or following some invisible path only he could see. And in the center of the prints, they found a circle of dead grass. 20 feet in diameter. Perfectly round. Nothing grows there now. The rangers said they've checked. 3 years later, that circle is still dead. Just bare dirt, in the shape of a perfect ring. They don't let hikers camp in that area anymore. They don't even mark it on maps. Marcus never hiked again. Sarah said he gets anxious even going to public parks now. He sold all his gear, deleted all his hiking photos. He won't talk about what happened, not even to her. But sometimes, Sarah said, she catches him looking at maps of the Appalachian Trail, just staring at them, tracing his finger along the path from Springer Mountain to Neal's Gap, the path he was supposed to walk.
The path that, according to one GPS unit sitting on a cairn in a clearing that doesn't exist, he did walk. All 40 miles of it. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night about this story. Marcus isn't the only one. There are other reports, scattered over decades. Hikers who set out on well-marked trails and end up walking in circles. Most get found eventually, confused, exhausted, unable to explain how they got lost on a trail they'd walked before. Some don't get found at all. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy doesn't talk about it. If you ask rangers directly, they'll mention disorientation, magnetic anomalies, or psychological factors, panic, stress, the mind playing tricks. But they can't explain the boot prints. They can't explain the perfect circles of dead grass, and they definitely can't explain how an experienced hiker with a GPS and a map can walk 40 miles and end up 2 miles from where he started. Unless something in those woods wanted him to walk in circles. Unless something was keeping him there, playing with him, watching him slowly exhaust himself, walking the same paths over and over, until finally, for whatever reason, it let him go. Marcus was lucky. He got out. Others haven't been so fortunate. Which brings us to our next story.
The shelter that wasn't there. The Appalachian Trail has designated shelters spaced every 8 to 12 miles along the route. They're 3-sided wooden structures, basically open-faced cabins with a sleeping platform. They're marked on every map, registered with the Trail Conservancy, maintained by volunteers. If you're through hiking, you get to know the shelters. They're reliable, safe. Places where you'll meet other hikers, share stories, rest for the night. In October 2016, a group of 4 hikers, 2 couples, were doing a week-long section hike in Virginia. They were aiming for the Dragon's Toe section, a popular area with incredible views.
The group consisted of James and Kelly Morrison, both 28, and their friends Dave and Amanda Sung, both 30. Experienced hikers, properly equipped, following a well-planned itinerary. On day 3, they were hiking from one shelter to the next. According to their map, it was supposed to be a 10-mile day, ending at Campbell Shelter. Easy terrain. They'd arrive at early evening, rest, cook dinner, and sleep. They reached Campbell Shelter right on schedule, just before sunset. Kelly was keeping a detailed journal of the trip. She was an English teacher and liked documenting their adventures. Her journal entry for that day describes Campbell Shelter as oddly quiet and somehow darker than it should be despite the clear evening light. She noted they were the only people there, which was unusual for a Friday night in October, prime hiking season. Usually, the shelters are crowded, but she figured maybe everyone was running behind schedule. Or maybe the weekend crowd hadn't arrived yet. Her journal describes dinner, freeze-dried beef stroganoff and instant coffee. She describes the 4 of them joking around, Dave doing impressions of their obnoxious gym instructor, Amanda planning their next hiking trip. Normal stuff. Good vibes. Then her journal entry changes tone. Around 8 p.m. she wrote that they heard voices coming from the woods behind the shelter. Not English. She couldn't identify the language. The voices were low, rhythmic, almost like chanting. James went to investigate with his flashlight but came back saying he couldn't find anyone. The voices continued for about 20 minutes. Then they stopped. At 10 p.m., Kelly wrote that they all heard footsteps on the shelter's platform. Heavy footsteps, pacing back and forth. But when they looked, there was no one there. She wrote, "We can all hear it. We're not imagining this. Something is walking on the platform with us, but there's nothing there." Her last journal entry that night, time-stamped 11:47 p.m., is just one sentence. "We're leaving. Now." The 4 of them packed up in the dark and started hiking. In her journal the next day, Kelly explained why. She said that around 11:30 p.m., they all heard breathing, close breathing, like someone was standing right next to each of them. Dave actually swung his hand through the air where the breathing was. Nothing there. But the breathing continued. And then Amanda screamed. She said something touched her, grabbed her ankle, a hand. She felt fingers, but when James shined his light on her leg, there was nothing there. But there were red marks on her ankle. Fingerprints, deep ones, like someone had grabbed her hard and tried to pull her. That's when they decided to leave. They hiked by flashlight and moonlight until they were a mile away from the shelter. Then they set up tents and tried to sleep. Kelly's journal said none of them slept well. They all reported feeling watched. The next morning, they packed up and continued hiking. They were shaken, but figured it had been some kind of collective panic attack. Stress, fear, the mind playing tricks. They decided to keep going, finish their section hike. They'd done 3 days already, only 4 more to go. That's when things got really strange. According to their map, they should have reached the next shelter, Jones Mountain Shelter, by mid-afternoon. It was marked clearly, 9.7 miles from where they'd camped, moderate terrain, but when they got to where Jones Mountain Shelter should have been, there was nothing there. Just woods. No shelter. No clearing. No sign there had ever been anything there. Dave's GPS confirmed they were at the right coordinates, but there was no shelter. They figured maybe the map was outdated. Maybe the shelter had been removed or relocated. It happens sometimes. So they kept hiking towards the next one, Gravel Springs Shelter, another 8 miles north. They never reached it. Kelly's journal gets increasingly frantic over the next 3 days. She describes hiking and hiking, following the trail, passing landmarks that matched their map, but never reaching another shelter. Not one. They should have passed 3 more shelters, but none of them were there. Other hikers started to notice the group was missing. They were supposed to check in with Kelly's sister every 2 days by satellite phone. When they missed their check-in, a search was organized. The 4 hikers were found 5 days after they'd left Campbell Shelter. They were only 12 miles from where they'd started. 12 miles in 5 days. They should have been 60 miles north. All 4 were severely dehydrated and malnourished. They'd run out of food on day 4. Amanda had a badly sprained ankle, the same one that had been grabbed. The swelling was severe, and the bruising had spread. It looked like someone had gripped her ankle with tremendous force and tried to pull her. But it was their mental state that worried the rescue team. All 4 hikers described the same thing. They said after leaving Campbell Shelter that first night, every shelter they reached was wrong somehow. James said the shelters looked right from a distance, but when they'd get close, details were off. The wood would be the wrong color. The sleeping platforms would be on the wrong side. Signs would have the right name, but the wrong mileage markers. And most disturbing, there would be other hikers there. But those hikers wouldn't respond when spoken to. They'd just sit there, silent, staring forward. Dave said once, at what was supposed to be Gravel Springs Shelter, he tried to get the attention of another hiker sitting on the platform. He waved, called out, even walked right up to the person. The person never moved, never blinked. And when Dave reached out to tap their shoulder, his hand went right through them, like they weren't there. But he could see them clear as day. That's when the group started hiking through the nights. They didn't want to stop at shelters anymore. They just wanted to get off the trail. But every time they thought they were making progress, they'd end up back at Campbell Shelter, the shelter they'd left days before. Kelly's journal describes returning to Campbell Shelter 3 separate times. Even though they'd been hiking in a straight line, even though their compass showed they were going north, they'd walk for hours, following the white blazes, and then suddenly they'd come around a bend, and there it would be. Campbell Shelter. Exactly as they'd left it. Their trash still in the fire pit, Kelly's dropped pen still lying on the platform where she'd left it 5 days earlier. Amanda said the last time they found themselves back at Campbell Shelter, they all just broke down crying. They'd been hiking for almost a week. They were starving, exhausted, and they couldn't escape. The trail kept bringing them back to that shelter over and over, like some kind of loop they couldn't break. It was pure luck that a helicopter spotted them. They'd been hiking through an open area, and the helicopter crew saw them waving. Otherwise, who knows how long they would have been out there. The official report called it severe disorientation due to stress and possible contaminated water. The Park Service suggested they'd been hiking in circles due to compass malfunction and fatigue. But that doesn't explain the GPS log showing 70 miles walked. It doesn't explain all 4 of them experiencing the same hallucinations, seeing shelters that weren't there, encountering hikers who didn't exist. And it definitely doesn't explain what happened next. 2 weeks after the group was rescued, a routine maintenance crew went to check on Campbell Shelter. They do this regularly, inspect the structure, clean up, make sure everything's in good condition. Campbell Shelter wasn't there. Not damaged, not destroyed, just gone. Where the shelter should have been, there was just flat ground. No foundation, no debris, no sign a structure had ever existed there. The maintenance crew thought they had the wrong location, but their GPS confirmed this was where Campbell Shelter had been for 30 years. They searched the area. No shelter. They checked with the Trail Conservancy. Campbell Shelter was still listed on all official maps and records, but it wasn't there. And here's the thing. When they looked through historical records, they found something disturbing. Campbell Shelter had been removed. In 1994, torn down, because too many hikers reported strange experiences there. Voices, apparitions,
missing time. The Trail Conservancy had officially decommissioned it and removed it from the trail. But somehow it was still on all the current maps. Still listed in all the guidebooks. The maintenance crews swore they'd inspected it dozens of times over the past 20 years. They had records, photos, documentation of repairs they'd made. But when they pulled up those photos, the images were corrupted. Every single one. Just black squares. And the repair records listed things that didn't make sense. Materials that were never ordered. Work done on dates when no crews were scheduled. Signatures from volunteers who'd never existed. It was like Campbell's shelter had been erased from reality, but the paperwork couldn't catch up. Or like something had been pretending to be Campbell's shelter for 20 years, and the moment someone noticed, it just stopped pretending. James, Kelly, Dave, and Amanda don't hike anymore. Kelly still has her journal from that trip, but she refuses to read it. She said she wrote things in there during those 5 days, things she doesn't remember writing. Entries between the ones I mentioned. But they're not in her handwriting. She won't tell anyone what those entries say. She just keeps the journal locked in a safe. She said if something ever happens to her, her sister should burn it without reading it. Dave moved to Arizona. He says he needed to be somewhere without trees, somewhere open where you can see for miles. He says he still has nightmares about walking through woods and seeing structures in the distance that aren't really there, buildings that vanish when you get close, places that exist only to trap you. Amanda's ankle never fully healed. Doctors say there's no physical reason for it. The sprain was minor, and there's no permanent damage. But she still limps, and the fingerprint bruises never completely faded. You can still see them if you look closely. 5 dark marks, like someone with very strong hands grabbed her and held on and tried to pull her somewhere she wasn't supposed to go. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy added a new shelter in that area. They called it Bear Wallow Gap Shelter. It's in a different location, on a different part of the trail. They don't mention Campbell's shelter anymore. If you ask rangers about it, they'll say they have no record of a shelter by that name. But if you look at old maps, I mean really old ones, from the 1960s and 70s, you'll find it. Campbell's shelter. And if you look even older, at maps from the 1800s before the Appalachian Trail existed, you'll find something else at those exact coordinates. A settlement. A small community that was abandoned in 1867 after everyone who lived there disappeared. 23 people. Gone without a trace. The settlement was eventually demolished and reclaimed by the forest. But some places, it seems, don't stay buried. Some places come back. And when they do, they're hungry for the people they lost. Campbell's shelter is out there somewhere. Maybe not on any map you can find. Maybe not where GPS says it should be. But it's out there, waiting. And if you're hiking the Appalachian Trail and you come across a shelter that feels wrong, if the other hikers won't talk to you, if the wood is the wrong color, if you hear breathing but see nothing, keep walking. Don't stay the night, because some shelters aren't meant to protect you from the wilderness. Some of them are part of it.
The Missing Week.
Sarah Jennings was 26 years old when she decided to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail. It was 2018, and she just finished her master's degree in environmental science. The trail was her gift to herself before starting her career. She was fit, prepared, and excited. She started at Springer Mountain in late March, planning to reach Mount Katahdin in Maine by early September. She was diligent about posting updates. She had a blog that she updated every few days at towns along the trail. Her parents could track her progress. She'd post photos, write about the people she'd met, describe the terrain. She was living her dream. In mid-May, Sarah was in Tennessee, approaching the Smokies. Her last blog post was dated May 12th. She wrote about the beautiful weather, the wildflowers blooming, and her plan to reach Clingman's Dome within the next week. She was on schedule, healthy, happy. The post included photos of her at a shelter, smiling, surrounded by other true hikers she'd been traveling with. That was the last anyone heard from her for a week. On May 19th, Sarah posted again. The post was brief. Back on trail. Had some trouble with my phone. All good now. Making good time. She included a photo of herself at another shelter, 95 miles north of where she'd been on May 12th. 95 miles in 7 days. That's about 13 to 14 miles per day. Perfectly normal for a thru hiker. Nothing unusual about it. Except Sarah has no memory of hiking those 95 miles. None at all. Her parents didn't notice anything wrong initially. Sarah continued posting updates. She finished the trail in September, summited Katahdin, and came home. She seemed fine, a little quieter, maybe, a little more prone to staring into space, but they figured it was just exhaustion from 6 months of intense hiking. It wasn't until Thanksgiving, 6 months after she'd returned, that Sarah broke down and told her parents the truth. She had no memory of an entire week on the trail. May 12th to May 19th was just gone. A blank space. 7 days of her life that she couldn't account for. She said she remembered posting the blog update on May 12th. She remembered going to sleep that night at the shelter. And then her next memory was waking up at a completely different shelter, a week later, nearly 100 miles away from where she'd been. Her first thought was that she'd overslept, but when she checked her phone, it was May 19th. A full week had passed. She looked through her pack. Everything seemed normal. She had less food, which made sense if she'd been hiking for a week. Her clothes were dirty. Her boots were worn. Her water bottles were half empty. All signs of a week of hiking, but she had no memory of any of it. She checked her phone for clues. There were photos, dozens of them, selfies at various locations, pictures of mountains, streams, other hikers, time-stamped across the entire week. But Sarah didn't remember taking any of them. And here's what disturbed her most. In the photos, she looked happy, smiling, posing at scenic overlooks, taking pictures with other hikers whose faces she didn't recognize. But when she looked closely at her eyes in those photos, she said something was wrong. She was smiling, but her eyes looked empty, dead, like someone was moving her face into a smile, but there was no one home behind her eyes. Sarah said she spent that entire day going through every photo, every detail she could find, trying to piece together what had happened. She had journal entries in a trail journal. She wrote in it every night. But the handwriting was slightly off. It looked like hers, but not quite. The letters were too perfect, too uniform. Like someone was copying her handwriting, but didn't quite understand the natural variations that come with actually writing.
The journal entries described normal hiking days. Miles covered, shelters stayed at, people met. But the details were wrong. Small things. One entry mentioned seeing a black bear at a location where black bears don't live. Another mentioned crossing a river that she later verified doesn't exist on that section of the trail. And the people she supposedly met, when she posted to thru hiker Facebook groups asking if anyone remembered hiking with her that week, no one responded. The names in her journal didn't match any registered true hikers that year. She tried to find the other hikers from the photos, the ones who appeared with her in those selfies, smiling at the camera. She posted the photos online asking for identification. No one knew who they were. And when hikers who'd been in that section at that time saw the photos, they said something disturbing. Those shelters don't look right. The backgrounds don't match the actual locations. A photography expert Sarah consulted said the images had been digitally manipulated. Not the people, the backgrounds, the mountains, the trees, the shelters. They'd been altered, subtly, but definitely altered. Like someone had taken real photos of Sarah and composited them onto fake backgrounds. But that didn't make sense. Sarah had the originals on her phone. They hadn't been edited, they'd been taken with her camera app in those locations. The metadata confirmed it. Except the GPS coordinates in the metadata were impossible. According to the EXIF data, several photos had been taken at coordinates that placed Sarah in locations miles off the trail, in places with no roads, no paths, no way to reach them without serious mountaineering equipment. One photo supposedly taken on May 15th placed Sarah at coordinates in the middle of a sheer cliff face. Sarah said she tried to talk to other true hikers who'd been in that section at that time. She found a few who remembered seeing her, but their descriptions were strange. One hiker said he'd seen her walking south, the wrong direction. Another said she'd passed him on the trail but didn't respond when he greeted her, just stared straight ahead and kept walking. A third said she'd seen Sarah standing off the trail at night, about 50 feet into the woods, just standing there, motionless, staring at nothing. But Sarah didn't remember any of these encounters. She didn't remember hiking south. She didn't remember standing in the woods at night. According to her memory, those 7 days simply didn't exist. She said the worst part was her body knew something had happened. She had blisters she didn't remember getting, scratches on her arms and legs from bushwhacking through underbrush, but she had no memory of going off trail. And her muscles were sore in weird places, not the normal true hiker soreness. It was like she was climbing, scrambling over rocks, using her upper body extensively. But the terrain in that section was relatively flat. There was no reason for that kind of soreness. She went to a doctor after she got home. She wanted to know if something medical had happened, a seizure, a stroke, something that could explain the missing time. The doctor found nothing. Her brain scans were normal, no signs of trauma or neurological damage. Physically, she was perfectly healthy. She even tried hypnosis, hoping to recover the lost memories. The hypnotherapist said Sarah did remember things from that week, but the memories weren't accessible through normal recall. Under hypnosis, Sarah apparently became agitated. She said things that disturbed the therapist enough that he recommended she stop the sessions. Sarah won't tell anyone what she said under hypnosis. She made the therapist destroy the recordings, but she did tell her parents one thing. I went somewhere that looked like the trail, but wasn't. And I wasn't alone. There were others, and they weren't human. Her parents think it was a false memory, a confabulation created by her mind trying to fill in the blanks. But Sarah doesn't think so. She said under hypnosis, she remembered details that were too specific, too consistent. She remembered walking through woods that felt wrong, trees that moved when she wasn't looking at them, a trail that shifted and changed direction. And she remembered the others, figures that looked almost human but not quite, walking alongside her, guiding her somewhere. Where was she going? She doesn't know. She doesn't remember arriving at any destination, just walking for days, following figures that she could never quite focus on, through a forest that didn't follow the normal rules of geography or physics. And then waking up at a shelter 95 miles north of where she'd started, with a week of her life gone. The thing that haunts Sarah most are the photos.
Those smiling photos of her at locations she'd never visited, with people who don't exist, because she doesn't think they're fake. She thinks they're real. She thinks she was at those places, with those people. She just wasn't in this version of reality when the photos were taken. She thinks for 1 week she slipped into something else, some other version of the Appalachian Trail, a trail that runs parallel to ours, but isn't quite the same. A trail where the rules are different, where distance and time don't work the way they should. And somehow she came back, but she came back changed, missing a week, missing memories, missing some part of herself that she can't quite identify, but knows is gone. Sarah doesn't hike anymore. She works in an office now, doing environmental consulting for corporations. She lives in a city, lots of people around, lots of lights. She says she needs that. She needs to be around people and noise and artificial things. Because sometimes when she's alone in natural settings, a park, a forest preserve, anywhere with trees, she'll get the feeling that the trail is calling her back. She'll see movement in her peripheral vision, figures standing between trees, beckoning. She'll hear footsteps matching her own, and she'll feel that same empty feeling she saw in her eyes, in those photos from the missing week. The feeling that something else is looking out through her eyes, something that came back with her from that other trail, something that's waiting for the right moment to take her back to wherever she was during those 7 days. She asked me not to use her real name for this story. Sarah Jennings is a pseudonym, but the story is real. The missing week is real. And the photos, those impossible photos of a woman smiling with empty eyes at locations that don't exist, those are real too. She still has them. She can't bring herself to delete them, because deleting them would be admitting that week happened. And if it happened, then it could happen again. To her, to anyone.
The Appalachian Trail is 2,190 miles long, but maybe in some places it's longer than that. Maybe there are extra miles that don't appear on any map, miles that exist outside normal space. And maybe sometimes hikers stumble onto those extra miles. Most of the time they find their way back, but they come back missing time, missing memories, missing pieces of themselves. And they're never quite the same again.
The Ranger's Report. This story comes from a park ranger who worked in the Great Smoky Mountains section of the Appalachian Trail. He's retired now, but he agreed to talk to me about something that happened in 2014. Something that wasn't in any official report. something that the Park Service doesn't want people to know about. I'll call him Tom. That's not his real name. Tom worked as a backcountry ranger for over 20 years. He knew every mile of the trail in his section, every shelter, every side trail, every camping area. He'd conducted hundreds of search and rescue operations. He'd seen lost hikers, injured hikers, hikers who died from exposure or accidents. He thought he'd seen everything. Until October 2014. Tom said it started with reports of a smell. Multiple hikers over the course of a week reported an overwhelming stench on a particular section of trail near Klingman's Dome. They described it as rotting meat, dead animals, but stronger, more pungent. Some hikers turned back because it was so bad. Others pushed through but reported feeling nauseated for hours afterward. Tom went to investigate. Park Service protocol for reports like this usually means a dead bear or deer, sometimes in an inconvenient location near the trail. Animals die in the woods all the time. It's nature. But usually the smell dissipates after a few days as scavengers clean up the carcass. This smell had been reported for over a week, and it was getting stronger. Tom hiked to the location with another ranger named Patricia. They reached the area around noon. The smell hit them about a quarter mile before they got to the exact spot hikers had indicated. Tom said it was the worst thing he'd ever smelled in 20 years of backcountry work. Not just rot, something chemical mixed with the organic decay. Something that made his eyes water and his throat close up. They followed the smell off trail, about 50 feet into the woods. That's where they found it. Tom said it looked like a campsite, but wrong. There was a clearing, roughly circular, about 20 feet across. In the center was a fire pit, but the rocks around it were arranged in a pattern, geometric, deliberate, not the random circle you'd make for a normal campfire. Around the fire pit were items, lots of items, and that's where the smell was coming from. There were clothes, dozens of pieces of clothing arranged in neat piles, shirts, pants, jackets, all hiking gear, but the clothes were rotting, covered in mold. Some had been there so long they were decomposing into the soil. Tom said some of the pieces were clearly old, styles from the 80s or 90s, but others were new, recent.
There were also backpacks, at least 12 of them, emptied out, contents arranged in rows next to each pack. Food wrappers, first aid kits, maps, compasses, water filters, all arranged with obsessive precision, like a museum display. And then there were the personal items, wallets, ID cards, phones, cameras, journals, all arranged in a spiral pattern leading from the fire pit to the edge of the clearing. Tom said he and Patricia stood there for a long moment, trying to process what they were seeing. This wasn't a normal campsite. This was a collection, a display. Someone had been gathering these items for years, decades, based on the age of some of the clothing. Tom said he'll never forget her voice when she called him over. "Tom, these people are all missing persons." She showed him the IDs. 12 different people. Hikers and disappeared on the Appalachian Trail over the past 30 years. Cases that were never solved. People who'd vanished without a trace. Their names were in the system. Their families were still looking for them. And here were their belongings, arranged in a clearing 50 feet off the trail. But there were no bodies, no bones, no remains, just their possessions. Tom immediately called it in. This was now a crime scene, possible homicide. They secured the area and waited for investigators. The Park Service sent a team. FBI got involved because it crossed state lines. Forensic specialists, cadaver dogs, the whole works. The investigation went on for weeks. They searched the entire area, used ground-penetrating radar, brought in specialized equipment. They were looking for graves, for any sign of what had happened to these 12 people. They found nothing. No bodies, no bones, no remains, just their possessions. The forensic team did find something disturbing, though. The clothes and backpacks had been cleaned meticulously. Someone had washed them, dried them, and then arranged them in the clearing. But they had been placed back outside to weather and decay naturally. Like someone wanted them to be found eventually. Like this was a display meant to be discovered. But it gets stranger. Tom said the investigators found something carved into the trees around the clearing. Symbols. Not any language or writing system they could identify. Just geometric patterns. Lines and circles and angles. They photographed everything and sent it to specialists. Linguists, anthropologists, historians. No one could identify the symbols. They didn't match any known human language or marking system. The carvings were old. The trees had been growing around them for years. But they also looked fresh, like they'd been recarved periodically to keep them visible. Like this was a display meant to be discovered. But it gets stranger.
The investigation eventually stalled. They had no suspects, no witnesses, no idea what had happened to the missing hikers. The official conclusion was that an unknown perpetrator had been collecting items from hikers over multiple decades, possibly a serial killer, possibly someone living in the backcountry, off-grid, preying on hikers. But Tom doesn't think it was a person. He said after the initial investigation, he went back to that clearing alone. He wanted to understand what had happened. He'd worked that section of trail for years. He knew the regulars, the hikers who came through every year, the long-distance backpackers who lived in the woods for months. If someone had been living out there, taking people, he would have noticed. Someone would have noticed. The clearing was in a part of the forest that hikers pass through all the time. It was only 50 feet off the trail. How could someone maintain that collection for 30 years without being seen, without leaving any evidence of their own presence? No shelter, no food cache, no waste, nothing to indicate a human had ever lived there. Tom said he stood in that clearing and tried to make sense of it, and that's when he noticed something. The trees around the clearing were wrong. They were arranged in a perfect circle, and trees don't grow that way naturally. They compete for light and space. They grow at random angles, but these trees formed a geometric circle, exactly equidistant from the center point. He started looking more carefully. The ground was perfectly level within the clearing. Not naturally level, precise, like it had been graded. But there were no tool marks, no signs of human intervention, just a perfectly flat circle
in the middle of irregular mountain terrain. And the rocks around the fire pit, when he measured them, they were placed at exactly 30-degree intervals, perfect geometric spacing. And the items arranged in rows were spaced exactly 6 inches apart, every single one, measured, precise. No human could maintain that level of precision naturally, not while arranging items over years or decades, not without tools and measuring equipment. But there were no tool marks, no evidence of measurement devices, just perfect, inhuman precision. Tom said that's when he heard it, a sound, low frequency, almost below the threshold of hearing, but he could feel it in his chest, a vibration, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. He looked around. The sound seemed to be coming from the ground, from beneath the clearing. He put his hand on the soil. He could feel it. Pulse, pulse, pulse. Something under the ground. Something alive. He said he left very quickly after that, filed a supplementary report noting the geometric precision and the sound. His supervisors told him to drop it. The case was closed. Unknown perpetrator, no evidence of ongoing danger. The clearing was filled in and the area was closed to camping. They put the case in the cold case files and moved on. But Tom couldn't let it go. He started researching, looking through old records, newspaper archives, historical documents. He found something. Before the Appalachian Trail existed, before the national park was established, there were reports of disappearances in that area. Going back to the 1800s, hunters who went into the woods and never came back, settlers who vanished, Native American legends about that particular valley, stories about a place where the earth was hungry, where offerings had to be made to pass safely.
The Cherokee called it something that roughly translates to the place that takes. They avoided it. When they had to pass through, they'd leave items behind: clothes, tools, food, offerings to whatever lived there. They understood that something in that ground wanted tributes, and if you didn't leave something willingly, it would take you instead. Tom thinks those 12 hikers didn't leave their belongings by choice. He thinks something took them, something that's been there for centuries, that collects, that arranges, that displays. And he thinks it's still there, still waiting, still taking. He said there have been 3 more disappearances in that area since 2014. Hikers who vanished without a trace. No bodies found, no evidence of what happened to them. The Park Service doesn't connect them. They treat each case as an individual tragedy. Lost hiker, probably fell, probably died of exposure. Body will turn up eventually. But Tom knows better. He knows those hikers are gone, taken, and someday, years from now, someone will stumble onto another clearing, another perfect circle, another display of belongings arranged with inhuman precision. He retired early, moved away from the mountains. He said he couldn't work that section of trail anymore. Couldn't hike past that area knowing what was beneath it, knowing that something down there was patient, ancient, and always hungry. Before he left, he did one more thing. He went through the missing persons reports for the Appalachian Trail, every unsolved case, every hiker who vanished without explanation. He mapped them. There are 13 locations along the 2,190-mile trail where disappearances cluster. 13 spots where multiple people have vanished over the decades.
The clearing Tom found was one of them, which means there are 12 more. 12 more places where something is collecting, displaying, waiting. The Park Service knows about them. Tom said they all know. Every ranger who's worked a trail long enough has heard the stories, seen the patterns. They don't talk about it publicly. Can't. Imagine the panic if people knew there were predatory zones along America's most famous hiking trail. Imagine the lawsuits, the political pressure, the loss of tourism revenue. So they stay quiet. They close camping areas when they have to. They redirect trails away from the worst zones. They train rangers to watch for certain signs. And they hope that whatever lives in those places stays satisfied with the occasional offering. But every year, more hikers go missing. And every year, rangers find things they can't explain. Clearings that shouldn't exist. Items arranged in impossible patterns. Evidence of something that collects human belongings with the patience and precision of something that has all the time in the world. Tom said his last piece of advice to me was this: if you're hiking the Appalachian Trail and you smell something that doesn't belong, if you find a place that feels wrong, if you see items arranged in patterns, don't investigate, don't touch anything, and for God's sakes, don't camp there. Just mark your map, report the location, and keep walking. Because some places on the trail aren't maintained by the Park Service. They're maintained by something else. Something that's been there much longer than any trail. Something that's willing to let most hikers pass safely, as long as it gets its tribute.
The parallel hiker.
In the summer of 2020, during the height of the pandemic, a hiker named Michael Torres decided to do a section hike of the Appalachian Trail. Everything was shut down. He had been working from home for months. He needed to get outside, get away from screens and news and isolation. The trail seemed perfect. Michael was 31, an experienced backpacker, and he'd been planning this trip for years. He started in Harpersfield, West Virginia, heading north towards Pennsylvania. He was planning a solo hike, 2 weeks, just him and the trail. Solo hiking requires certain precautions. You carry a satellite communicator. You file your itinerary with someone back home. You're extra careful about navigation and safety because there's no one to help you if something goes wrong. Michael did everything right. He had all the gear, all the training. He was prepared. What he wasn't prepared for was being followed. On his second day out, Michael noticed a hiker hiking behind him, about a quarter mile back. He'd catch glimpses when the trail would open up or when he'd look back from a ridge. Just another hiker. Nothing unusual. The trail was less crowded than normal because of the pandemic, but there were still people out there. By the third day, Michael realized the hiker behind him was maintaining the exact same pace. He'd speed up, they'd speed up. He'd slow down, they'd slow down. Always a quarter mile behind. Never closer, never further. Michael decided to test it on day 4. He stopped for lunch at a shelter and waited for the other hiker to catch up. He wanted to meet them, say hello, figure out if they were actually following him, or if he was being paranoid. He waited 2 hours. The hiker never showed up. When Michael started hiking again, within 20 minutes, he saw them.
Quarter mile. Back. Same distance, same pace. That night, Michael camped at a designated site. He set up his tent and waited. Watched the trail. The other hiker should have passed or stopped nearby. But hours went by. Sunset came. Darkness fell. No one passed. Michael went to sleep uneasy, but figured maybe the hiker had taken a side trail. Maybe they'd camped somewhere else. Maybe he was overthinking it. He woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps. Someone walking around his tent. Slow circles, around and around. He lay there, frozen, listening. The footsteps were quiet, deliberate. Like someone was examining his tent from every angle. Michael called out, "Hello? Can I help you?" The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, after a long pause, a voice, just passing through.
The footsteps continued, circled his tent twice more, then walked away down the trail. Michael waited until the sounds faded completely before he unzipped his tent and looked out. Nothing. No one. Just the dark woods and the empty trail. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, he checked around his tent, found footprints in the dirt, boot prints. They circled his tent exactly as he'd heard. But there was something wrong with them. They were too deep, way too deep. Like someone carrying an enormous amount of weight, or like something much heavier than a human had made them. Michael broke camp immediately. He wanted to put distance between himself and whoever had circled his tent. He hiked fast, didn't stop for breaks, just pushed north as hard as he could. By midday, he saw them again. Quarter mile back, same hiker, same pace. Like the night before had never happened, like they hadn't circled his tent at 3 a.m. Michael tried something different. He stepped off the trail, hid behind some rocks, waited. He wanted to see this person up close, see their face, get some answers. He waited 20 minutes. Then he saw them coming up the trail, and his blood went cold. The hiker looked normal from a distance. But up close, things were wrong. The person was wearing hiking clothes, had a backpack, looked like a regular hiker, but they moved wrong. Their gait was off, too smooth, too even, like they were gliding more than walking. And their head didn't move, didn't look around, just faced straight forward, never scanning the environment like a normal hiker would. Michael watched them pass within 15 feet of where he was hiding. He got a look at their face. It was his face. Not similar, not someone who looked like him. It was his exact face, his features, his expression. Like looking in a mirror. The hiker was him or something that looked exactly like him. Michael said later that he'd never experienced true primal fear before that moment. Not fear of danger, not fear of getting hurt, but existential terror. The fear you feel when reality stops making sense, when you see something that cannot exist, but does. He stayed hidden until the doppelganger was out of sight. Then he ran.
just grabbed his pack and ran down the trail in the opposite direction. South. Back the way he'd come. He didn't care about finishing his hike. He didn't care about anything except getting away from whatever that thing was. He hiked until dark, probably covered 20 miles, didn't stop except to catch his breath. When he finally made camp, he didn't set up his tent, just laid out his sleeping bag in the open where he could see in all directions. Around midnight, he heard them. Footsteps. Coming from the north, from the direction he'd been running from. Getting closer. Michael turned on his headlamp, and there at the edge of his light was the doppelganger, standing motionless, staring at him with his own face, not moving, not speaking, just standing there, watching. Michael shouted at it, "What do you want? What are you?" The doppelganger tilted its head, a movement that was too precise, too mechanical. Then it smiled. Michael's smile. His exact smile. But wrong. Too wide. Held too long. And its eyes, Michael said its eyes didn't reflect the light. They absorbed it. Just black holes in a face that looked like his. Then it spoke. In his voice. His exact voice. You can't outrun yourself. It turned and walked away, back into the darkness. Michael didn't sleep. He packed up and started hiking at first light. He needed to get off the trail, get to a town, get around other people, real people, living, breathing, normal people. He felt safer. The doppelganger wouldn't follow him here. It couldn't. Not around witnesses.
He ordered food, tried to calm down, told himself he'd been hallucinating. Stress, lack of sleep, the isolation getting to him. That's all it was. Had to be. Then, one of the other hikers came over. "Hey man, I think your buddy's waiting for you outside." Michael looked out the window. There, standing across the street, was the doppelganger, standing perfectly still, staring at the restaurant, staring at him. The other hiker was confused. "That is your buddy, right? You guys have the same jacket. Thought you were hiking together." Michael looked down at his jacket, then at the doppelganger. It was wearing an identical jacket, same color, same brand, same dirt stains in the same places. "No," Michael said. "That's not my friend." The hiker shrugged and walked away. Michael stayed in the restaurant for hours, ordering coffee, trying to figure out what to do. The doppelganger stood across the street the entire time, never moving, never breaking eye contact. When the restaurant closed, Michael had no choice. He had to leave. He stepped outside. The doppelganger was gone. Michael got a hotel room, locked the door, shoved furniture against it, sat on the bed with his knife in his hand, and waited for morning. He'd decided to quit the hike, get a shuttle to the nearest city, fly home. Forget the whole thing. At 3 a.m., he heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Measured. They stopped outside his door. He heard breathing. Then, his own voice. You can't hide from yourself. The doorknob turned. Locked. The knob rattled. Something pushed against the door, hard. The furniture he'd stacked scraped across the floor. Michael screamed, yelled for help, pulled out his phone to call 911. The pushing stopped. Footsteps retreated down the hallway. By the time hotel staff arrived, There was no one there. Michael left at dawn, got the first shuttle out, made it to an airport, flew home to Denver.
He thought it was over. Whatever had followed him on the trail, it was confined to the trail. It couldn't leave. He was safe now, back in civilization, back in the real world. For 2 weeks, everything was normal. He went back to work, tried to process what had happened, tried to convince himself it had been stress, a breakdown, his mind playing tricks. Then he saw it again, at a grocery store, standing at the end of an aisle, his exact double, staring at him. When he blinked, it was gone, but he'd seen it, clear as day. It started happening regularly. He'd catch glimpses of the doppelganger, in crowds, across the street, in reflections, always watching, always wearing what he was wearing, always maintaining that quarter-mile distance, even in the city, even surrounded by people. Michael tried therapy. The therapist suggested psychosis, prescribed medication. The medication didn't help. He still saw it, still felt it following him, a constant presence at the edge of his perception. He started researching, looking for similar stories, and he found them, scattered across hiking forums and paranormal websites. Stories of hikers who'd been followed by themselves. Doppelgangers that mimicked their appearance perfectly, always maintaining distance, always watching. Most of the stories ended the same way. The person would see their double, be followed for days or weeks, and then the sightings would stop. But the person was never quite the same afterward. They'd become more withdrawn, more paranoid, like something had been taken from them, some essential part of their identity. A few stories ended differently. The person would wake up one morning and feel different, wrong. They'd look in the mirror and know with absolute certainty that they weren't looking at themselves, that something else was looking out through their eyes, that somehow, during the night, they'd been replaced. Michael is terrified that's what's happening to him. He said some mornings he wakes up and doesn't recognize his own hands. They feel foreign, like they belong to someone else. And sometimes he'll catch himself moving in ways that don't feel natural, turning his head too smoothly, walking with a gait that's too even, smiling too widely. He's losing track of who he is. The boundaries are blurring. He can't tell anymore if he's the original Michael or if he's the doppelganger. If somehow, without realizing it, they'd switched places. If the thing that followed him on the trail finally caught up, finally closed that quarter-mile gap, and now it's wearing his life like a costume. The real Michael Torres might still be out there, still on the trail, still being followed, still trying to outrun himself. Or maybe he's gone. Maybe the thing took him completely. Maybe it absorbed him, consumed every aspect of his identity until there was nothing left of the original. And maybe that's what it does, this thing, this phenomenon, whatever it is that follows hikers on the Appalachian Trail. Maybe it's not trying to kill them. Maybe it's trying to replace them, to take their place in the world, to become them so completely that even they don't know who they are anymore. If you're hiking the trail and you notice someone following you, maintaining perfect distance, never getting closer or further away, pay attention to what they look like. Because if they look like you, if they're wearing your clothes and have your face, don't try to talk to them. Don't let them get close. And whatever you do, don't let them touch you. Because once they touch you, once they make contact, the boundary dissolves. You won't know anymore which one is real,
Which one is the original? Which one is the copy? And by the time you realize something's wrong, by the time you notice you're moving too smoothly, or smiling too widely, or staring just a little too long, it'll be too late. You won't be you anymore. You'll be it. The thing that walks the trail. The thing that follows. The thing that replaces. And you'll find yourself drawn back to the trail, drawn back to the woods, waiting for the next solo hiker, ready to follow them, a quarter-mile back, never closer, never further, until it's their turn to forget who they are, until it's their turn to become the parallel hiker.